Hello, today we've got an exciting package from iFlight, the people that bought us the lovely Nazgul 5. But just before we get into that, a quick reminder to please like or dislike this video if you didn't like it, comment down below, don't forget to subscribe, and if you can find that little bell icon, click it, it'll tell you when I'm uploading stuff. So this is going to be another lockdown review. We still can't go out here, so I am stuck to flying around my house or in the garden, which may be quite a challenge because this is not a small quad, but it is made for doing just that sort of thing, flying in tight proximity where you don't want props on display to get people, but capable of actually carrying a GoPro. First things first, let's take it out of the box and see what we've actually got here. I think you'll recognise the type of quad it is because they seem quite popular at the moment, this type of quad. Here's what you get in the box. Some instructions on the flight controller. This is the iFlight Success. I can never tell what the actual name is with iFlight. Some interesting stickers, some bag of things, we'll get to those later. We got some props, and here we have the main event. Yeah, it's one of these. This is basically 3-inch props encased in what feels like a 3D printed shell, and on the outside, this is not what I expected actually. I thought this was going to be all like plastic. This is a sort of a soft, flexible foam, kind of like a packing material. So it's not ultra squidgy, but it's got plenty of give in it, and I can just imagine this just bouncing off stuff. It's not quite as heavy as I thought it was going to be, which is a relief. At the same time, it's a lot heavier than your regular 3-inch quad because of all this stuff built around it. We've got the XM Plus version here, but there's lots of different versions. You can have different receivers or plug and fly. It's got the little Calyx EOS 2 in it, which is not the greatest camera, but again the idea is not to have the fantastic FPV picture. It's to do a tool, it's to do a very certain tool. You're not going to sort of get this and think, this is brilliant, I'm going to use this flying in the field every day. It's for serving a very specific purpose, and that is to be able to get stuff on your GoPro or HD camera safely without fear of killing people with props as you might do with a regular quad. Unfortunately, one thing I know it doesn't contain is the GoPro mount. There is a specific GoPro mount for this. It seems weird they didn't put it in the package when this is really what you fly the quad for. But that's what it is. No GoPro mount, so we'll have to get our own there, because I want to try carrying my GoPro 7. Now it's starting to get heavy, and see what sort of footage we can get from it. But I'll tell you what else we had in the bag. We got these little props. And these are 3045, the old Bluntnose style. I haven't seen these for a while. And in these bags, we've got one of these little adapters for plugging in the USB, because the USB connector is down inside there, and there's no way you'll be able to get a regular USB connector in. Then in the other bag, we have a spare battery strap. We've got a couple of these battery friction things for sticking. That's obviously going to go on the top there to make the battery hold. We've got a couple of little antenna holders, which is basically just going to go straight over these and into these little holes there. And we've got this tiny little stubby FPV antenna, which is going to go on the back there, obviously. These are Zing 1408 motors running at 3600 kV. These are designed to run on a 4S LiPo. It's said for sort of light indoor stuff, you might want an 850. For longer outdoor flights, a 1300. I've got plenty of those for 4S, fortunately. The only thing I keep hearing about these things is they are horrendously noisy. I mean, really noisy. You've got high kV motors running larger props in basically tubes. I mean, what's not to cause a noise there? 35 amp BL Heli 32 ESCs, I think, and up to 500 milliwatts on the VTX. All good. I think next thing we need to do is get it configured up, get the receiver bound. Fortunately, I've got access to the bind button just there. And then think about how we're going to put the GoPro mount on. I'll obviously do a couple of tests just without a GoPro first, make sure I can hover it. Where I'm restricted to the garden and the house, I'm going to have this set up to be very gentle. As you can imagine, you don't want this knocking around. I mean, it's not going to do damage in the house, but I'm just thinking about the amount of air this can displace. It's going to be interesting. Join me in a second. Okay, we've got it hooked up to Betaflight, so let's go in there. I don't want to hook it up to Betaflight too many times because I'm slightly worried about that little right-angled USB connector. It's quite difficult to get in there, and I have the feeling you put that in and out too many times, it's going to go dodgy. Well, it's been obviously calibrated to be nice and flat. That's good news there. If we go over to ports, we see we've got IRC tramp and we've got sensor input for the ESCs there. if we go into configuration, some different things about this one. Firstly, it's reversed, although I don't know why that matters so much when you're talking about enclosed props. The third thing I notice is we're running something slightly different. We're running D-Shot 300 with a 4K loop. But you also notice that our ES sensor is active and we've got bidirectional D-Shot. So this looks like it's set up for using RPM filters, which is interesting. Never used that before. And of course, where you've got BL Heli 32, the bidirectional D-Shot is just one of those features that's in there. You don't have to pay extra for it. So that's good news. Elsewhere on here, the only thing I'd be changing, obviously, the XM Plus is set up. I don't know why this has got telemetry output. There's no telemetry in an XM Plus. Maybe it was set up for the RXSR as well. Air mode permanently on, I'd turn that off. RX loss, I'd turn off there. But obviously the personalisation I'd change. Pid tuning, I'm going to trust they've done the necessaries here, although these look very much sort of defaults, but perhaps it's all in the filters, so I'm going to trust they've done some stuff there. Rate profile though looks absolutely default, 170 and 0 there. I'm going to set this up. I'll take this as one of the rates, but obviously I'll be flying this in very close proximity, so I'm going to move this right down to something a lot more gentle. Receiver, well, the channel map's wrong for me. I can sort that out. I notice the RSSI channel's not enabled. Hopefully they have flashed the firmware on the XM Plus with the RSSI, in which case I'll find out what channel it is and put it on. Modes, not much there, is there? There's arm and angle, and that's about it. And motors, I'll have a quick test of these, because one thing we want to look at is we should have like a 0 error rate, or less than 1% when we run the motors up. And then OSD wise, all a bit of a mess there, all crushed down the bottom, not looking particularly nice, so I will sort that out. Presumably they've sorted out the, yep, they've got the bands there as well. I notice IMD6 pops up now, which is the nice spread of channels which you could put multiple people on, and the idea here is it avoids the harmonics, so it should be clean for 6 people. And whilst I was configuring everything up that I mentioned, one of the things that I did as well was go through and just double check those motors, make sure I could spool each one up and that the RPM would come back with a reading and that we'd get a 0 error rate, and that all looked good. So now it's time to give it a try and fly it. Well, here we are in the garden for a change, and we're going to see just how loud this thing is and try and fly it around this quite cramped space. With any luck I'll be able to put the FPV goggles on, try it out. Normally I would give it a go through the house, but with 2 people working in there I can't, so it's going to be, if we get to the FPV thing, a tiny FPV flight around this area, but at least we'll see if this can manage tight gaps. Nothing has happened. Why is that? Jesus Christ! That was vicious. Try it again. Better. Oh my god, that is incredibly loud. Incredibly loud, but it was worse because of the gaps in the deck where it sort of worked as an echo chamber. Now, the reason I had that early crash, which there was no damage for, by the way, was there was no beep when I armed, and I just flicked on the throttle just a little bit and it jumped straight up in the air, as you saw, and came down. But yeah, it came down quite heavy, but 0 damage, so yay for those protectors and everything. So I did a little FPV flight, and the reason it was a little one is because it turned out that the SD card I had in the GoPro 7, which is on board, was completely full, which was really annoying, so it was just beeping at me. So I thought I'd get a little bit of extra GoPro footage just externally there, whilst getting a bit of an FPV flight to see how it went. Now, I was getting a little bit of a rocking here. You'll notice it didn't quite seem to hold straight for me. And it's kind of one of the reasons I don't like flying in angle. It's kind of fighting against you all the time. I'd prefer to be flying in normal acro, but This area is a little bit small, so I was a little bit nervous, especially as this thing's already gone crazy once. But I'm able to hold position, fly through quite nicely in quite a tight area, so I was pretty happy. But really I wanted to see what the GoPro footage is like, so I brought this down and had to go out the next day to film the rest. One thing I had neglected to do was actually sort out my rate profile settings so I'd have a more gentler rate. And I sort of realised this because that throttle was like really crazy powerful. We don't want that much power when we're flying in tight proximity. There's certainly be situations where you do want all that power, but for me in that garden situation I wanted more throttle range and to be able to use it without it being too sensitive. So this is what I went back and changed it to. I put my super rate and RC rate way down. I put my RC Expo up. I gave myself a little bit of a throttle curve and I put myself a throttle limit of 60%, which is still more than enough power for flying this in a sort of tight situation. And then I went out and tried it again. Okay, new SD card in the GoPro, so take 2. First thing I did was just a very quick flight with that battery that wasn't quite empty from the day before, just to make sure those rates were okay. And you can kind of see how much air this thing's displacing by the amount of grass flying in the air. Now I wanted to show this GoPro footage on its own to start with, just to see how it compares when you put it side by side to the DVR footage. So let's bring this one down and we'll go out for our proper flight with a full LiPo. Okay, so here we go, and the angle on the FPV camera is quite nice actually. It's very wide, which I like. It's very useful for this. You can see that we're getting quite a bit of wobble in the DVR footage. Again, I'm not enjoying flying in angle mode, but I kind of guess I have to. You will see the difference that a GoPro 7 running Hypersmooth will make to this scene. And really where you might think, oh, well, Hypersmooth's cheating, when you're dealing with this type of quad where your idea is you need to get in a place and you need to get some footage that's going to work, this is what you need to use. And many people will also use things like Real Steady to try and get the smoothest possible picture they can to do the job they want. You'll see a couple of things popped up there. I had a link quality warning, which I don't quite get what that's for 4.1. I always looked at link quality as a Crossfire thing. I need to investigate that because the RSI was quite high. And the other thing, you know, is when we were going down the alley, and I forgot I'd put a fence panel there. As we went in, we had a bump, and again, this is just absorbed quite easily with those prop protectors, so it's really doing its job. Now, I can't really fly this as I'd like to in this small space. You can see that when it sort of moves forward, it seems to work quite well. We seem to get a reasonable sort of flowing motion. I am by no means an expert at trying to fly this way, although it's something I quite like to develop because I think it's interesting that you can use this sort of quad to get some pretty nice footage. It's just a case of learning how to fly it slightly differently. And I'm very keen to see what this will look like when I can take out of angle mode and actually fly gently in acro, because I think it will be a lot smoother. The other thing you will pick up on is we're getting just a little bit of jello occasionally in the GoPro. Even with Hypersmooth and Superview and all that stuff, we're getting some vibrations from the quad combined with the bright light that's not doing us any favours and producing a little bit of jello there. Normally in this sort of weather conditions I would put an ND8 filter on the GoPro as well, and again this is all part of the you should do what you have to do to get the footage you want. For today I didn't have it because I wanted to see what it would do raw, but that's telling me for these conditions we need to do a bit more. Again, I kind of think it would be smoother if we could do it in acro mode, but that's what we got for today. And with that battery just about chewed up, I brought it down. Well, that's part one of the review where I'm just literally flying around in my garden. I'm looking forward to getting it out in a slightly more open area just so I can get it out of angle mode and see if it's a smoother in acro, because that's one thing I noticed. It seemed to be a bit jittery when I was going around, and I always think that angle sort of fights with you a little bit, but I felt a little bit too restricted in my garden to do anything else, and I would have liked to have taken it in the house, but with my daughter and wife being there I don't really have the plausible denial where I could claim that, you know, robbers came in and wrecked the house rather than me going through and wrecking it with a quad. So I'm looking for a place outside but where I need to get close in proximity to something which, you know, I don't want to hurt by whacking into it with a quad or something. That'd be an interesting test to do later. So about 3 minutes is what I would expect out of a 1300 4S, which is what I was using. Not particularly good ones, and other people I notice are using 1500s to get about 4 minutes, which sounds like a reasonable idea. It seems that adding more weight to it doesn't really matter. With a 1300 mAh battery and this GoPro 7 and the mount, this weighs in at 620 grams, which I would call a bit of a heavyweight. I actually posted a picture on Instagram saying how heavy this was, and I tagged iFlight in there, and they said, oh, perhaps you should try the TPU mount. To which I said, perhaps you should put it in the box. I'm a fan of iFlight. I think they make really nice quads, but I'm a bit confused why they'd bring something out, they'd configure it quite nicely, but they wouldn't include the TPU mount for the GoPro when that's really all you're going to fly this thing for. It seems a bit of a weird thing to miss out. I mean, yeah, sure, perhaps other people are putting like Insta360s or something on it, but some sort of base mount, I think, would be definitely needed. Certainly was tough. You saw in that first clip there, I flew it into the air and I took my throttle off, came down with a good old crack, but nothing was hurt at all. And I talked about at the start how this is going to be really for a really specific purpose, getting that sort of footage using a GoPro where you can't get in there with a 5-inch quad. But I speak to my friend and colleague Andy RC, who told me that he knew a bunch of people that were buying this because as a sort of starter quad they could crash it a lot and it wouldn't hurt itself. And I thought, you know, that's maybe valid, but there's better quads to do that with. So if you wanted to think, oh, I need a quad that's really tough as a beginner one, I would go for something like this. I reviewed this a little while ago. This is the HGLC Sector 132. And the reason why is because it has guards. They're not as strong overall as the iFlight, but you have a certain amount of protection, and when you get more confident or you want to go out and rip a bit more, you can take the guards off and then it's a regular 3-inch quad. So I think this is more versatile, whilst I do think this is a specialist thing for one task. You will find at that weight and that RPM, this isn't very kind to batteries. You need decent high C batteries, not like the one I had. The motors run very hot as well. One of them was feeling a little bit warm after that first flight. It's something I'd keep an eye on, but it wasn't outrageously hot. But yeah, I expect them to be under considerable pressure because you're lifting all that weight with these motors and the most inefficient setup you could have. But certainly does the job. So yeah, join me next time when hopefully, if the circumstances meet it, I'll be able to take this out and give it a bit more of a proper flight around and see what happens. But this has been the iFlight Green Hornet, which was kindly supplied by Banggood for review. And if you check the links below, you can find out where to check it out in more details. Until next time, hope that was helpful, and I'll catch you next one. Bye for now. Well, you've made it to the end of the video, so thanks once again for watching. If you like what you saw, then please consider subscribing, and if you really like what you saw, then be sure to check out the link to my blog for a variety of ways in which you can help support this channel.